The forest of the Ardennes is deceptive. In the winter of 1944, it looked like a postcard. Tall pines dusted with snow, quiet villages, and a silence so deep it felt holy. The American soldiers stationed there called it the Ghost Front. It was a place for rookies to get their feet wet and for battered veterans to rest. The war, they were told, was practically over. The Germans were beaten. The march to Berlin was just a matter of time. They were wrong, dead wrong. At 5:30 a.m. on December 16th, the world exploded. A heavy, freezing mist hung over the trees, blinding the American sentries, and out of that white void came the roar of monsters. King Tiger tanks, 70-ton beasts of steel, burst through the tree line, followed by 250,000 desperate German soldiers. It was Hitler's last gamble, a massive surprise counter-offensive designed to split the Allied armies in two. The American lines didn't just bend, they shattered. Chaos reigned. Men were cut off from their units, communications were severed, and panic spread like a virus. But the real enemy wasn't just the Nazis. It was the winter itself. Temperatures plummeted to near zero. Men caught in the open froze to death where they stood. The mist grounded the mighty Allied Air Force, leaving the ground troops alone in the snow to face the blitzkrieg. As the German panzers tore a 50-mile gap in the American line, creating the famous bulge, one town became the anchor of the entire defense, Bastogne. It was a critical road junction. If the Germans took it, they could rush their tanks to the sea. If the Americans held it, they could clog the German arteries and starve the offensive of fuel. The U.S. Army rushed the 101st Airborne Division, the Screaming Eagles, into the town. But they arrived ill-equipped for a siege. Most of the paratroopers were still wearing their summer uniforms. They had no snow boots, forcing them to wrap burlap sacks around their feet to prevent frostbite. Ammunition was low, medical supplies were running out, and worst of all, they were completely surrounded. 7 German armored divisions encircled the small town, cutting off all supply roads. The battered bastards of Bastogne were trapped in a freezing cauldron, pounded day and night by German artillery. The snow turned red and black with blood and soot. Inside the perimeter, the situation was grim. Foxholes had to be dug into frozen earth that was as hard as granite. Men slept in shifts to keep from freezing to death, sharing body warmth in the biting cold. But despite the misery, the morale of the paratroopers was terrifyingly high. When a soldier was told they were surrounded, he famously replied, "They've got us surrounded, the poor bastards." On December 22nd, the German commander, confident that the Americans were broken, sent 4 soldiers under a white flag to the American lines. They carried a typed letter demanding the honorable surrender of the town to save the troops from total annihilation. They gave the Americans 2 hours to respond. The message was run up the chain of command to Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe. When he heard the demand, he laughed and muttered, "Us surrender? Aw, nuts." He didn't know what to write back. His officers suggested that his first reaction was the best one. So, McAuliffe typed out the most famous reply in military history. One word, to the German commander, "Nuts," the American commander. The German officers receiving the note were confused. "Is this negative or affirmative?" they asked. The American colonel handing it to them smiled grimly and said, "It means go to hell." The fighting resumed with savage intensity. The Germans, insulted and furious, unleashed the Luftwaffe. Bombs rained down on the town center, reducing buildings to rubble, but the line held. The paratroopers fought tank attacks with bazookas and small arms, holding off heavy armor with sheer grit. While the 101st was holding on by their fingernails, help was coming from the south. General George S. Patton, the most aggressive commander in the Allied forces, had pulled off a logistical miracle. In just a few days, he had turned his entire Third Army 90 degrees in the middle of a snowstorm and began a forced march to relieve Bastogne. But Patton had one major problem. The weather, the heavy fog and snow meant the Allied air superiority was useless. Patton, desperate to save the boys in Bastogne, famously ordered his chaplain to write a prayer for good weather. He demanded the Lord grant him 4 days of clear skies to kill Germans. Whether by divine intervention or meteorological luck, on December 23rd, the skies cleared. The sun came out blindingly bright on the white snow. The roar of engines filled the air, not tanks, but P-47 Thunderbolts. The Allied Air Force descended like avenging angels. They smashed the German supply lines, bombed the panzers into scrap metal, and dropped pallets of food, ammo, and medicine to the starving troops in Bastogne. The tide had turned. On December 26th, the lead tanks of Patton's Third Army smashed through the German encirclement and linked up with the 101st Airborne. The siege was broken. The German offensive, which had started with such terrifying power, ground to a halt in the deep drifts of the Ardennes. They had run out of fuel, run out of time, and run out of men. The Battle of the Bulge was the bloodiest battle the United States fought in World War II. Over 19,000 Americans were killed, and another 70,000 were wounded or missing. It was a baptism by ice. The winter of 1944 proved that the American soldier wasn't just a product of industrial might, but a warrior capable of enduring the harshest conditions on Earth. Hitler had bet everything on breaking the American spirit in the snow. Instead, he found that the American spirit, much like the winter itself, was unforgiving. The road to Berlin was now open, paved with the ice of the Ardennes. The Ghost Front had become a graveyard for the Third Reich.